Carl Jung uncovered something that still shakes modern psychology. When an empath finally has enough, they become more dangerous to a narcissist than the narcissist ever imagined. Not because they turn cruel, but because they turn unbreakable. That's the truth behind why a fed-up empath is more dangerous than the narcissist ever imagined. And before we dive deep into Jung's insights, let me ask you to hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment if this resonates. Share your own empath story below. Your voice adds power to this community. Now, let's set the stage. Empaths are often seen as the soft ones, the people who absorb everyone else's pain, the healers who give without limits. But Jung noticed something few others dared to say. When an empath reaches their breaking point, they don't collapse. They transform. And this transformation flips the entire power dynamic with narcissists upside down. Jung called this shift an alchemical moment, when all the hurt, all the manipulation, all the years of carrying other people's shadows suddenly turn into what he described as psychological gold. That's when the empath stops being just a vessel for other people's darkness and becomes a force of light no narcissist can dim. And here's the shocking part. Narcissists fear this more than anything, not because the empath will fight back with the same weapons, but because the fed-up empath transcends the battlefield entirely. They play a different game, one narcissists can't win. So let's walk through Jung's observations and break down the exact stages of this empath awakening. Because once you see how the transformation unfolds, you'll understand why a fed-up empath is the one thing every narcissist dreads. The first step in the transformation of a fed-up empath is recognition. This is the moment when everything finally clicks. The empath suddenly wakes up and sees the patterns that have been running their life for years, sometimes decades, without them even realizing it. It starts with small realizations, the times they said sorry even when they hadn't done anything wrong, the moments they carried guilt for someone else's mistakes, the countless occasions they bent over backward to make others comfortable while their own needs were ignored. All of this begins to make sense in one painful, clarifying moment. They see the truth. Love was never supposed to feel like endless giving while receiving only crumbs in return. All those times they believed sacrifice was the measure of love, when in reality, they were being drained. This is the moment Jung called lifting the veil, when unconscious patterns suddenly become conscious. It's a strange mixture of relief and shock. Relief, because finally they understand it wasn't their fault. Shock, because everything they thought they knew about relationships, love, and giving is challenged. For years, they absorbed not just their own pain, but the pain, anger, and frustration of everyone around them. They carried the emotional weight of partners, friends, family, even colleagues. And now, they see it for what it was: unconscious manipulation, projection, and expectations they were never meant to fulfill. Recognition is brutal, but necessary. It's not about blaming others, it's about seeing clearly. This clarity is the foundation for everything that comes next. Without it, the empath stays trapped, reacting automatically to the world, giving endlessly, apologizing endlessly, and feeling powerless to protect themselves. Once this veil is lifted, the empath begins to wake up to their own power. They see how deeply their sensitivity and compassion can be a tool, not just a burden. They realize their giving nature isn't a weakness. It's a strength that, when consciously directed, can change the way they interact with the world. Once the empath has recognized the patterns in their life, the next step is integration. This is where transformation really begins. Instead of rejecting their sensitivity or seeing it as a weakness, the empath starts to embrace it consciously. What once felt like a heavy burden, feeling everything, sensing everyone else's emotions, being drained by other people's moods, now becomes a tool, a powerful instrument for clarity and protection. Their emotional radar, which used to leave them exhausted and vulnerable, becomes a shield. They learn to distinguish their feelings from the feelings of others. They start asking themselves, is this really my pain, or is it someone else's projection? Am I responsible for this emotion, or is it theirs to carry? This simple but profound awareness stops the constant automatic absorption of others' negativity. Jung observed that integrated empaths develop what he called a form of psychological vision. He described them as psychological seers, people who can read hidden motives, intentions, and subtle emotional cues almost instinctively. They can detect dishonesty, manipulation, or emotional games long before these behaviors fully unfold. Integration also means learning to respond rather than react. The empath doesn't immediately take responsibility for other people's moods anymore. They no longer apologize reflexively, nor do they overextend themselves to please someone else. Instead, they start to choose where and how to give. Their sensitivity becomes strategic. It's not about shutting down empathy, it's about directing it consciously. This stage is also deeply tied to shadow integration, a concept Jung emphasized. The empath acknowledges the parts of themselves they were taught to fear or suppress: anger, selfishness, the ability to say no, self-protection. These qualities are not evil or wrong. They are necessary tools for balance. By integrating these aspects, the empath can maintain their natural compassion without losing themselves. In practical terms, integration looks like this. Seeing manipulation before it happens, they notice micro-expressions, shifts in tone, subtle cues that reveal someone's hidden agenda. Setting boundaries without guilt. Saying no feels natural, not like a moral failing. Choosing who to give their energy to. They stop feeding people who drain them unconsciously. Through integration, the empath transforms from a passive absorber into an active observer. They are no longer at the mercy of other people's emotions. Instead, they become a conscious force, able to navigate relationships with precision, care, and inner strength. This stage is the turning point, where the empath begins to understand the real power in their sensitivity. They are not weak, they are awake. And this is the moment narcissists unconsciously start to feel threatened. Because an empath who integrates their shadow and directs their sensitivity consciously is no longer an easy target. They are now a psychological seer, aware and unshakable. Now we're diving even deeper. This is where the empath's real transformation takes place. Jung noticed that empaths don't just carry their own feelings, they often carry the shadows of everyone around them. Think about it. The anger their parents never expressed, the sadness their partners ignored, the lies, manipulations, and unprocessed emotions their friends dumped onto them without even realizing it. Over the years, the empath absorbs all of this. They become what Jung described as a kind of walking trauma repository, holding on to pain that isn't theirs simply because they feel it so deeply. For a long time, this is exhausting. It can feel like a heavy, invisible backpack filled with everyone else's emotions. And because they are taught to always give, to always care, and to always forgive, they often suppress their own needs while carrying everyone else's emotional weight. But here's the turning point. When a fed-up empath finally reaches their limit, something extraordinary happens. They don't just release all that stored anger, grief, and frustration. They transform it. They take what once felt like poison, the endless absorption of others' pain, and turn it into strength, wisdom, and clarity. Jung called this process the transcendent function. It's the principle that opposites can come together to create something completely new. For the empath, their burden becomes a source of power. The very thing that once made them feel weak, their sensitivity, their compassion, their deep connection to others' pain, now becomes the foundation of their strength. What used to weigh them down now lifts them up. What once made them vulnerable now makes them unshakable. Their own emotions, combined with the shadows they've carried and transformed, give them a new level of insight into human behavior. They can see patterns, detect detect manipulation and navigate relationships with a clarity that no one else has. In simple terms, the empath's shadow integration is like turning lead into gold. What looked like weakness is now their greatest strength. What felt like a burden is now wisdom they can use to protect themselves and guide others. This is why Jung realized narcissists unconsciously fear a fed-up empath. Once an empath has integrated their shadow, they are no longer just sensitive, they are conscious, sovereign, and almost impossible to manipulate. Imagine someone working with a colleague who constantly takes credit for their work and shifts blame whenever things go wrong. For years, they might have tried to explain themselves, defend their ideas, or smooth over the tension. But once they stop feeding the other person's ego, stop trying to prove themselves, the dynamic changes. The manipulator's mask starts to slip, and others begin to notice the truth for the first time. Or think of someone dealing with a family member who uses guilt and emotional pressure to control them. For years, they might have taken responsibility for the other person's feelings, walked on eggshells, or tried to prevent emotional outbursts. But once they set firm boundaries and refuse to participate in the guilt games, the manipulative patterns lose their power. The control that once felt unstoppable suddenly falls apart. Now imagine being in a romantic relationship where a partner constantly criticizes and belittles, projecting their own issues onto you. Instead of reacting with guilt or trying to fix them, the empath recognizes what's happening. They see the projection for what it is, step back, and respond with clarity and calm. Walking away is no longer painful, it's empowering, because they are acting from consciousness rather than fear or obligation. In all these cases, the empath doesn't fight back with cruelty, anger, or revenge. They simply become aware. They stop unconsciously participating in the cycle of manipulation. And this is exactly what Jung emphasized. Consciousness is the greatest weapon against unconscious manipulation. Once the empath wakes up and sees the patterns clearly, they no longer need to struggle or prove themselves. Their awareness alone changes the entire dynamic. Jung saw 3 levels of empath development. 1. The unconscious empath feels everything, understands nothing, a sponge for others' emotions, easy prey for narcissists. 2. The awakening empath starts recognizing patterns, learns about projection and shadow work, begins to set boundaries. 3. The sovereign empath, fully integrated, deeply compassionate, but also immune to manipulation. They can feel without absorbing, love without losing themselves, and connect without sacrificing. This is the rise of the fed-up empath, and this is why narcissists fear them. Here's the paradox Jung pointed out. The more an empath integrates their shadow, the more compassionate they become. But their compassion is no longer naive. It's discerning, fierce, and untouchable. Narcissists thrive on unconscious empathy. They can't survive conscious empathy. The awakened empath doesn't need revenge. They don't need to fight or prove anything. They simply withdraw their energy, and the manipulative system collapses. Jung called this psychological immunity, the ability to stand in clarity while others flail in their own storms. Narcissists cannot handle this because without the empath's unconscious cooperation, they're left alone with themselves. In Jung's language, the empath begins as the wounded healer, gaining wisdom through suffering. But when they reach this fed-up stage, they become the sovereign healer. They heal from strength, not sacrifice. They choose who receives their energy. They stop being drawn to the broken and start connecting with the conscious. This creates what I call the empathic revolution, where awakened empaths form communities built on respect, not exploitation. Jung believed that every individual who awakens helps raise the collective consciousness. When one empath wakes up, they give others permission to do the same. So why is a fed-up empath more dangerous than a narcissist ever imagined? Because their power doesn't come from manipulation, it comes from authenticity. They refuse to absorb what isn't theirs. They refuse to manage emotions they didn't create. They refuse to explain themselves to people committed to misunderstanding them. That refusal is the most dangerous thing of all. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For empaths, that means realizing their sensitivity is not a weakness. It's a compass, it's a radar, it's their superpower. If you've ever felt too sensitive or too much, remember, that's exactly what makes you untouchable once you awaken. Narcissists feared your awakening because once you see clearly, you can never be fooled again. Comment below, "I choose who receives my energy." Share this with someone who needs to remember their power. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and join me in the next video, where we'll dive even deeper into the psychology of empathy and protection. You're not too sensitive. You're exactly what this unconscious world needs to wake up.